This is a presentation that myself and Sarah Bryan set up for last year, and it's been updated for this year. But it's basically to tell you a bit about routes into research and sources of funding for getting started in the first place. I think the main message is that there are different routes and options for different types of people. If there are any medics and dentists in the audience, you will know that there's a fairly well-established path for academic career development for you, and I'll briefly go over that. But there is a developing pathway for non-medical clinicians and health and social care practitioners, and it's certainly worth knowing about that. And more recently, there's been developments for staff specifically in local authority and services commissioned by local authorities. And also there's a career path, as there always has been, up to a point for non-clinicians. So I'm going to talk about all those different groups and how you take your first steps in research. So firstly, thinking about doctors and dentists. Hopefully, as a medic or a dentist, you will be familiar with the integrated academic training pathway. So this is really built into your training, and it takes place at various stages along your clinical training pathway. What it consists of is a specialised foundation programme. It used to be called the academic programme, and the whole point is that you take time out alongside your clinical training to learn research skills or teaching skills or leadership and management skills, and it provides dedicated time for academic activities, usually during your F2, but it can be F1. You have 4-month academic placement in F2, and that can be done in a variety of ways. It's usually coordinated by a local university. It's often focused around a project, and it can be research or quality improvement, and it will be supervised. And I'm sure as medics and dentists, you will be aware of where to get information on that programme. It takes various forms. In a post foundation, so once you've done your main training, there are other opportunities to undertake research. Often these are funded locally in sort of integrated academic training posts. So these are, for example, the in-practice fellowships. So that's an opportunity for GPs and dentists to take a master's. Then there are academic clinical fellowships and clinical lectureships. So the clinical fellowships, the ACFs, are pre-doctoral. You can see quite a large number of medics and dentists undertake those each year. It allows you time to prepare for a PhD fellowship and progress as a senior clinician continuing research. You can then undertake clinical lectureships or academic clinical lectureships, again, to develop your research career, providing protected time to focus on a research or an educational project and to develop your research skills. And these are hosted by partnerships of medical schools, health education in England, and various partner organisations. I know a number of the biomedical research centres, for example, host ACFs. Now, not every medic will opt to do the academic programme, the specialised programme, and there are out of programme opportunities, obviously, to undertake research as well. So that's where you may take time out from training, and this is where you can stop for a while and then do a PhD. And obviously there are various funding schemes that you can apply for, including the National Institute for Health Research, where you can apply for a personal fellowship of your own. And then there are Wellcome, MRC, and charities, other charities that also provide funding for PhD work. Sometimes these are organised through academic doctoral hubs, such as the MRC and Wellcome. So basically, you would apply to the Higher Education Institute for a designated PhD place. And then there are other sorts of grants that you can apply for, which may not be related to fellowships. If we look at the National Institute of Health Research, it has a plethora of schemes, funding schemes. These are specifically fellowships. I'm a great fan of fellowships. I think they give you an opportunity to undertake independent research obviously supervised, but it allows you to think through what you want to do, and it also gives you plenty of opportunity to learn new skills, because it's very much part of a fellowship programme that you learn skills as well as undertake a piece of research. The National Institute for Health and Care Research has a brilliant programme of fellowships for a variety of people. In terms of medics and dentists, you can apply for their academic doctoral fellowships and advanced fellowships. You can also apply for the in-practice and ACFs, etc., that I've been talking about, that are built into training. And often locally you will find there are fellowships that you can undertake to give you a taste of research. Certainly in the Thames Valley, the local clinical research network provides fellowships for medics who spend some of their time involved with projects, perhaps recruiting onto research projects that are underway, but it also gives them an opportunity to work on their own, for example, PhD application. I put a little dotted circle around pre-doctoral fellowships. These schemes are really for people who want to change career. So if you were a medic and you wanted to become a medical statistician, there is the opportunity to undertake a pre-doctoral fellowship, which will allow you to retrain in a master's in something. But ordinarily, if you're a medic and you want to continue with your clinical role, then the other fellowships are more appropriate. The proposed work, as for any of the schemes that I'm talking about in relation to NIHR, have to fit with their remit. So that is clinical and applied health research or social care research. It has to have clear potential for directly benefiting patients or service users, carers or the public. And it can involve patients and service users and or carers, other people, obviously samples from people, populations as a whole. For example, in public health, it might involve health technology assessment or health and care services research. For the advanced fellowship, so once you've done your doctoral training, they have a little more leeway in that you can go a little more upstream and include early translational or experimental medicine research in your work. At the doctoral level, that's very much covered by what's going on in the Biomedical Research Institute. So that's basically the pathway for medics, and I think most medics will be very well aware of that pathway that is open to them. For non-medical clinicians, so nurses, midwives and allied health professionals and other health and social care practitioners, it's really an evolving clinical pathway at the moment. The importance of getting a variety of health professionals into research is very much acknowledged by the National Institute for Health Research and basically the NHS. And so there's a great move now to develop a pathway, an academic clinical pathway for example, nurses, midwives and allied health professionals. This is what's been set out, and obviously I don't expect you to read all that, we'll look at it in more detail. In terms of the early career, things that you're looking out for, the things that you're trying to develop in yourself, we can go through some of those. So if you're a nursing midwife or allied health professional and you're thinking of stepping into research, you have to ask yourself, am I this sort of person? These are the sorts of things they'd be looking for in someone who might be encouraged, I suppose, to think about a clinical academic career. So it's somebody who is consolidating or developing their own clinical practice, beginning to develop specialist skills and expertise, be an agent of change. So for example, maybe you're involved in audit or training others or developing local practice. Someone who is implementing evidence, so looking at new developments, applying them to services, evaluating services, and challenging practice. In terms of clinical and research responsibilities, there'll be people who are involved with planning, implementing and evaluating care, supporting research in your own clinical area, perhaps taking part in projects that are happening, contributing to research groups and networks, undertaking undergraduate teaching, implementing research into practice. And in terms of pure research capabilities, taking a lead in research activity, identifying or developing local clinical networks, developing research knowledge and skills, so perhaps taking part in or setting up journal clubs locally, supporting learning and teaching in your area of interest, identifying your own research issues from observing practice, critically appraising guidelines and evidence to develop practice, and perhaps thinking about and talking to local libraries to develop systematic reviewing skills to address various issues. So if you're that sort of person, or you're interested in getting involved with research, these are the sorts of things you will be orientating yourselves towards as you undertake your practice. In terms of National Institute for Health Research programs relevant to NMAHPs and other health and social care practitioners, there's a dedicated scheme here specifically for non-medical clinicians who want to carry on with clinical practice but want to develop their research skills. And this again is a fantastic scheme. It takes you through the pre-doctoral stage, to doctoral work, to advanced clinical and practitioner academic fellowships. And I'll talk a little more about those in a minute. You can also apply for the academic schemes. So these training schemes are open to everybody. And those are really for people who perhaps want to concentrate on the academic side and maybe less interested in keeping their clinical skills going. There are also a lot of internships locally, some of them part of the pre-doctoral clinical and academic fellowships, but also within biomedical research centres you often come across preparatory fellowships, for example, that you can apply for just to get your foot in the door, or just to experience what it's like to take part in a research project. And again, if you're thinking of a change in career and you want to be a medical statistician or a health economist, then the pre-doctoral fellowship is open to you also. To be eligible for the clinical and practitioner academic scheme, you have to be sort of allied to one of the following organisations. You need to have at least 1 year's experience of practice. You have to show some commitment to a career as a clinical practitioner or academic. You have to stick to the NIHR programme, and depending on the scheme, some academic qualifications. So if you're applying for a doctoral fellowship, for example, they will expect you to have a first degree or a master's. So if you're thinking of applying for the clinical and practitioner academic scheme, which award suits you best? Well, it really depends on what stage you're at. If you're very early stage, if you have very little track record of research, but you're beginning to get interested in research, perhaps you're undertaking some of the activities that I've spoken about already, probably the right scheme for you are the internships. Basically, these are run through different organisations locally, and it depends on where you are. So, for example, in the Thames Valley, Oxford Brookes runs a number of internship schemes. Other schemes are run by Applied Research Collaborations, which are National Institute for Health Research bodies that undertake locally relevant research. So most regions will have an ARC that may be involved in training. The internships are supervised. It provides you an opportunity to learn about the concepts and methods relating to applied health research. And basically the funding covers a sort of salary backfill and your training. The focus of the internship depends on where you're at. If you're starting out, you may undertake a bit of training, perhaps learn how to do literature reviewing, learn a bit about patient and public involvement. As you're progressing, you may undertake a systematic review, perhaps to inform a doctoral fellowship or a pre-doctoral clinical academic fellowship. You may undertake a small study or an audit. You may take time out to write a grant application. So the output of an internship might be, for example, an application for an NIHR pre-doctoral clinical academic fellowship. If you're slightly further on as a result of your internship, you could apply for the doctoral scheme. If you have some experience, so perhaps you've undertaken an internship or you've got some other research experience with outputs, then you can apply for a pre-doctoral clinical academic fellowship, or PCAF. And the output of this may be a master's degree, quite often a master's in research. And and or, you know, an application for a doctoral clinical and practitioner academic fellowship, or DCAF. I'm afraid there are a lot of acronyms around here. If you have a bit more experience still, so maybe you've got a master's under your belt already, or you've got you know, the other academic qualification you need, if you haven't got a master's, would be a first class or upper second, I think, in degree from your first degree. But if you don't have a degree, that's fine. You can do your master's, and that will also qualify you to move on. You can get a bridging PCAF, so that's a small amount of training and time to prepare for a doctoral application. Or if you've already got a master's, you might want to go straight for the doctoral scheme. So that might be the DCAF, which is the clinical academic scheme, and the doctoral research fellowship, which is the more academic scheme. And actually, if you work in a local authority, there's another scheme that I'll talk about, which relates specifically to local authorities. If you've already got a doctorate, then you can move on to the rest of the clinical academic scheme, so the advanced clinical and practitioner academic, or the advanced fellowship, depending on your focus. And again, so those are things that you can think about. So that's basically if you are a non-medic clinician or some other form of practitioner. So if you, for example, are a social care practitioner, those schemes, or public health practitioner, those schemes are open to you. And if you're working within a local authority, or you're working within a service that's commissioned by local authorities, there are some specific schemes that you can also apply for. This is really responding to a desire to stimulate research in local authorities, and these have been set up fairly recently. So these are the NIHR programs that are relevant to non-medical staff in local authorities. So the scheme that's, one scheme that is available to you is obviously the clinical and practitioner academic fellowship. If, for example, you are a nurse or a social worker or a public health professional, those schemes are still open to you, as are the academic schemes. But there's a special stream for you. So it's the pre-doctoral local authority fellowship scheme, or the doctoral local authority scheme. So if you, as I say, work within a local authority, these additional schemes are also open to you. And again, change of career, you want to be a medical statistician or health economist, or another methodologist, and I'll talk a little more about those fellowships later, you can also apply for those schemes. In addition to the PLAFs and the DLAFs for local authority, there's also something called the Local Authority Spark scheme, which is basically a placement. So basically, if you're within a local authority, you want to spend some time in an NIHR organisation such as an ARC or an RDS, you can actually take time out to learn about research as an intern within the NIHR. It also provides an opportunity for those working within the NIHR to spend some time in the local authority. So that's another scheme that's open to you. So a little bit more about the Local Authority Academic Fellowship Programme. As I say, there's a pre-doctoral local authority fellowship that gives you an opportunity to undertake a master's and prepare for a PhD application. There's also a doctoral local authority fellowship, which enables you to undertake a PhD. And I've talked about the short placement award. So as with the other schemes, or the other clinical and practitioner academic schemes, it allows you to retain your employment, progress professionally, but at the same time have protected time to undertake research. As I say, you have to be employed by a local authority or services commissioned by a local authority. If you are an NHS person, you're eligible only if you're employed by a local authority, and you're not eligible for the clinical and academic clinical and practitioner fellowship scheme. Again, you'd have to follow the NIHR remit, as would all of these schemes. And in terms of academic qualifications, there are some, for example, for the doctoral scheme, you will need a master's. And if you, or a first or upper second class degree, if you don't have that, a master's. What about for non-commissions? Again, looking at these schemes, you can apply for the research trained schemes for all. So these are the more academic fellowship schemes. I just want to briefly talk about the NIHR pre-doctoral fellowship scheme. Here, the purpose is to develop as a career methodologist in health or social care research. So this is very much about retraining as a methodologist. Working in a research design service, we know that our medical statisticians are very sought after. In fact, we keep losing medical statisticians to other professions who perhaps provide slightly better salaries for them. And so there's actually a great shortage of really good methodologists in health and social care research. So if you want to retrain in this different, to have a different career as a methodologist, this scheme is specifically for that. You have to have completed some sort of first degree and obviously want to be a methodologist in health and social care research. The sorts of things that NIHR are looking for are medical statistics in particular, health economics, operational research, modelling, bioinformatics, qualitative research, mixed methods, epidemiology and clinical trial design. So if you're interested in a career in any of those and you need to make a step change in order to undertake that work, then a pre-doctoral fellowship might be the sort of thing that you're looking for. Basically, it as I said, it sort of facilitates a career change. So you may have a bachelor's degree already. It will give you a master's degree and the opportunity, I suppose, to go on from that in terms of a doctoral application at a later stage. If you already have a master's, you can gain some additional training and perhaps apply for a doctoral research fellowship. It basically covers 50% or 100% of your time for a varying degree of months, so it's quite a flexible fellowship, and it will cover your current salary plus training plus patient and public involvement costs. And the next step from a pre-doctoral fellowship might be a DRF or AF, so depending on where you are. Undertaking one of the academic doctoral fellowships, and possibly if you're in a local authority, the local authority doctoral fellowship. Apart from the NIHR, there are other pre-doctoral and doctoral fellowships that it's worth being aware of. Charities and research councils often have various fellowships that you can apply for. For example, Cancer Research UK has a pre-doctoral research bursary. This is pitched at medics, nurses, and other health professionals, and it's a sort of pre-PhD opportunity to gain experience in research, to decide whether or not you want to do a PhD or an MD, and it covers your salary and research expenses up to 12 months, so up to 25k. It's not for undertaking a specific master's, unlike some of the NIHR schemes. And that's just an example. There are others. The other thing to be aware of is that funds for PhDs in particular are often allocated, and masters actually are often allocated to the supervisor or the institution. And then the supervisor or institution may come up with a research question that they want answering, or they may be open to suggestions from people applying to their own doctoral schemes. So, for example, the Medical Research Council has schemes which delegate funds for masters and PhD studentships to universities, who then allocate places. And these sorts of things might be advertised obviously on university websites, find a PhD, those sorts of things. you have to be very aware of university deadlines, because even though you may have funding for your fellowship, universities themselves have a sort of allocated number of doctoral students they can have at any one time, and quite often university deadlines have to be met as well as the funding deadline. So for example, at the University of Oxford, in the department where I'm based, there's a sort of window where you have to apply to undertake a research within the department. The deadline is usually around January, and that's quite separate from any funding application that you may make. It also makes you eligible for a range of PhD scholarships that the university or that department might have allocated to it, including those, for example, that may come through the Medical Research Council or Wellcome. But it's very important that you're aware of those university and departmental deadlines, because if you pitch up, even with funding, they'll say, I'm afraid you'll have to wait till next year because our allocation is full. So it's just something to be aware of. So thinking about your first steps in research. So I've given you an overview, I hope, of the first funding opportunities, or first opportunities that there are out there for you to undertake research. I would urge you to, listening carefully to the Q&A session this afternoon, where you will have local people who will know about where all the internships are based, for example, within the local research landscape. And so you can ask specific questions about research funding, and also about general research support. There's a lot of research around. I know that last year when we first set up this event, it was just amazing the number of people we had on the Q&A panel in the afternoon. There are so many people who are out there trying to encourage researchers, both in terms of funding and in terms of support. That we had such an enormous panel. We have split it into 4 this year. So there are a lot of people out there who will want to help you, whether it's your local R&D lead, whether it's your local research design service, whether it's your local higher education institution that runs internships. So there's a lot of support out there, and the thing to do is to get in touch with people. So if you think about our first steps in research, I think the first is to demonstrate a commitment to a research career. So you may be at the stage where you started questioning practice, you've been observing things that you think could be done better, perhaps you've taken the first few steps in evaluating a local service, but demonstrate some commitment to a research career, show an interest in what's going on around you in terms of research. It's important also to develop your own research-related network in your area of interest, because obviously we work at quite a specific level as clinicians and academics, and there'll be local peers, colleagues and researchers, both locally and more broadly, who are interested in your research area. So it's important to get in touch with those people, discuss your interests, if there are any sort of events or local journal clubs, local research networks, professional research networks. These are all things that you can tap into and get involved with. Find role models and mentors locally and indeed beyond. So again, finding out locally who's undertaking research, who is interested in perhaps what you're interested in, and who can provide some local support for perhaps taking those first tentative steps into the research world. Perhaps it might be someone who's already involved with research who would like a bit of help with the project that they're undertaking. Be proactive in developing your research skills. So look out for formal training courses. Obviously, those can be supported by the funding schemes that I've been talking about. But there may be local day courses that you can go on as part of your professional development. There may be journal clubs. If there isn't a journal club, perhaps think of setting one up, and you can get yourself, you can draw to yourself other people who are interested in undertaking research. And as I say, where appropriate and possible, be part of research teams. So, for example, we at the RDS spoke to somebody fairly recently who got really enthused about research from taking over some data collection work on a project that was being run. It was an international study that was being run in her hospital, and I think the data collector they had to step aside for a reason, and she took over and got greatly enthused by research and started thinking about applying for internships and PCAFs to develop her own research practice. Build your CV, and that might be easier said than done, but in the world of academic research and clinical academic research, publishing is important, and it doesn't have to be in a highfalutin journal to begin with. You can publish in your professional magazines, but it all shows a commitment and interest in service evaluation, service development and practice generally, and all these things will be very helpful when it comes to apply to internships and doctoral fellowships. But don't be fazed by that. I think, you know, obviously if you're following the medical specialised academic pathway, part and parcel of that is publishing and getting small research grants. It's a lot more difficult if you're in a different professional group, and most people who fund internships and fellowships are very aware of where you're from, and they won't have high expectations if you've come from a profession where it's actually quite difficult to take time out to undertake research. But if you can publish, you know, whether it's locally or in a professional journal or in an academic journal, you can, and that will help. That will help your CV when it comes to applying for things. Small grants also can look very impressive, you know, even if it's just a travel grant or a grant to go to a conference, or any small research grants. And there are pots of money locally, sometimes within trusts. For example, at the Oxford University Hospitals Trust, we have the Oxfordshire Health Services Research Committee that enables you to undertake small pieces of research. So there are sometimes small pots of money that you can apply for, local pots of money that can help you undertake a little bit of research on the side with supervision, appropriate supervision. Where applicable, speak to your R&D lead or your professional body and get support from your manager. I think a lot of people feel it's very difficult in a hard-pressed NHS to take time out to develop yourself in terms of research, and you do need support from your manager to do that. Every trust will have some sort of R&D lead. Some of them are highly developed offices, depending on where you are. Others, they may be fairly small offices, but they will be very interested and happy to speak to you about your research ambitions. And as I say, and as I've been talking about, look for opportunities for your first formal steps in research, whether that's internships, pre-doctoral awards, or doctoral fellowships. And once again, the Research Design Service is here to help you. It's very easy to access support. If you're very early stage, that's fine. You'll find at RDS South Central, we do run our Launchpad workshops, which occur every couple of months. If you've just got a research idea, but you're fairly early on and you feel you're not ready for, you know, sort of detailed input into any research project you have, you can come and have a tentative chat to an RDS advisor who can talk to you about your research idea and think about what your next steps might be.